Chancellor, so the Bank of England has just said that it looks like you might just about make that pledge of halving inflation by the end of the year. Is this kind of the moment to say, victory, mission accomplished?
No, I don't think we will have met the pledge until we've halved inflation. It's encouraging that the Bank of England thinks that we'll not just meet that pledge, but this time next year inflation will be about 2.8%. But we should recognise that there is a lot of pain for families, for businesses. The process of getting there is very tough, and so what we have to do is to stick to the plan to get there as quickly as possible, because once we get inflation down, you can start to see a path where interest rates will come down, and that will relieve the pressure on families with mortgages, and that's what obviously we want to happen as soon as possible.
But it is taking quite a lot of pain to get there. I mean, does that surprise you? Is that just the logic of wanting to, to fight these inflationary forces?
Well, we have had some huge global shocks, 1970s energy crisis, a once-in-a-century pandemic, and that has had lots of knock-on effects. But what we know is that if you look at other countries, America's got inflation down to 3%. In the Eurozone, it's just over 5%. So we know the approach we're taking works, and the quicker we don't deviate from that plan, the quicker we can relieve the pressure on families.
Talking about the US, actually, one of the striking things about the economic forecasts, rather than just the inflation forecast, but growth forecasts, is that, in the US, they have pretty much regained that pre-financial crisis trend. So they've bounced back really fast. When you look at the numbers here from the Bank of England, it is pretty bleak. We are basically flatlining. We're nowhere near getting back to the pre-COVID trend, let alone the financial crisis trend. Does that worry you? Because the UK, on that front, it does look like an outlier. We are really weak compared with so many other economies out there.
Well, there are definitely things we can learn from the US. There's a dynamism in the US economy, which we think we have the potential to match, which is why we say we want to be the world's next Silicon Valley, with the incredible growth in technology and life science and clean energy businesses that you see in the US. But actually, if you look at those statistics, what you see is that not just the UK, but Europe, the US, Canada, Japan, we're all in a low growth trap that we need to get out of. And our long-term growth rates are actually high. If you look at what the IMF say, they are higher than France or Germany or Japan, but they're not high enough. And what you'll see from me in the autumn statement coming up is a plan that shows how we break out of that low growth trap and make ourselves into one of the most entrepreneurial economies in the world. That's what we want.
I'm curious about your take on North Sea oil, because we've just had this statement from the Prime Minister. He wants more exploration in the North Sea. Actually, when you look at the numbers, and I know you do like to look at these numbers, it won't make that much difference. It's still going to be declining. It's not going to change. We're not going to become energy independent anytime soon. So isn't this all just like a bit of a political sideshow rather than something that fundamentally matters?
No. And you just asked me why it was that our inflation is higher than other countries. And one of the reasons is because we have higher gas dependency. About 3/4 of our homes are connected to the gas grid that's higher than many other countries. So the more we import gas in the shrinking period that we're still going to need it as we move to net zero, the more dependent we are on a country on what someone like Vladimir Putin does. So of course it makes sense to develop our own gas reserves rather than import it. And that is important for the transition because it's more carbon efficient.
But we're still going to be importing it. This is not going to change that in the slightest.
It is going to change it, and
it'll change it by the tiniest bit.
Well, I would just say that you look at what's happened in the last year and the impact that the invasion of Ukraine had on families up and down the country, and every single thing we can do to improve our energy independence.
But you have to admit it's marginal. That's the thing. This is not going to change that as much. We will still be a massive importer of gas.
We will still be a bigger importer of gas, and that's why we've got big clean energy projects to try and reduce that over time. But whilst we're importing it, it uses 3 times less carbon to use our own gas than to import it from the other side of the world. And that's why this is the right thing to do for the planet, as well as for our energy security.
Do you have a sense at the moment as to how much net zero is going to cost?
Well, I think there are clearly costs in the transition, But in the end, if we're going to be a successful economy, we talked earlier about the problem of low growth facing Western economies. What we need is abundant, cheap energy. Now, our plan is that a quarter of our energy will come from nuclear, and that will be very abundant and very cheap, and the rest of it we'll get from renewable sources over time, again, very cheap going forward. So I think of course there's a lot of investment that's needed. That investment in turn creates jobs, 6,000 jobs at the gigafactory that JLR announced a few weeks ago in Somerset. So I think there are opportunities, but yes, there are costs as well, but this is very, very important for
Do you have a
our
sense as to
transition.
how big they are?
Well, the costs are well documented, but I think it's also important that we talk about the opportunities.
But how much are they? If they're well documented, then how much is it?
Well, the Climate Change Committee talk about the costs of moving to net zero, but I think we also need to talk about the opportunities and the benefits in terms of the jobs it creates, and remember our responsibilities to the planet.